as
Gianmarco,
well.
remember you originally for this podcast were going to read a book. You were going to read a book.
So my original premise, one of the ideas I had for podcast was I'd read a book before every episode, which is
You
insane.
did that for
it was
today.
during COVID. It was during COVID where you'd be like, I have time to read books.
Yeah.
Whole book.
And this is the first time. I mean, it really is the most research I've ever done for an episode, given that
so
I've
honored.
read the whole book. And we'll get to it in a second. I got things. First, I gotta. Welcome to the downside. This is Gianmarco Soresi. I'm here with my co-host Russell Daniels. Russell.
Hi.
And we're joined today by a comedy critic, writer, Jesse David Fox.
Hello.
My mom had a correction for another one recently. So, get this, newsflash. My mom, her fake tits were not paid for by my dad.
Okay.
So we had a long conversation. Longer than my mom's fake tits. About my dad has purchased. What my mom said. My mom said, "Oh, if your dad had paid for these, they would have been much bigger." And I said, "Okay, great."
I thought you were going to say better. Like, she's just like,
Oh,
which
Well,
is
I
a
also,
cheap
when
guy.
you said that, I did hear better. but
Yeah.
clearly He
She got
just-
a discount.
That was his preference.
Yes.
Got it.
It's funny because I thought my dad always says he's a legs guy.
Yeah.
I'm sure if he could pay for that leg surgery, he'd do it. But so what my mom said is that my dad did pay for basically she said every woman my dad dated at some point they would just they spring up with new big double D's. One day I'll ask my dad how much. I want to ask him how much did you pay for my voice lessons compared to fake tits for your girlfriends, and let's compare. My mom said she got it after. She didn't specify any part that I wasn't allowed to say, but she called it correct. She got after my second sister was born.
Okay.
So she called it it's like a baby, what she called a mommy makeover. I guess I don't know if people still use that term, but
Yeah.
after a certain number of kids, and so she got them done, and then she said something about my stepdad, where like he was like, you don't have to get him done. I'm not really a boobs guy, and then she said, but when I got him done, he got a lot more touchy feely. Most guys are more boobs guys than you think, and I was like, great, that's good to know. And because my mom's short, power reasoning, that means my stepdad is a butt guy. So that's good to know. Good to know for my sisters listening too. Your father is a butt guy, and the reason this came up was because at some point my little sister. She was growing up and she told my mom, "Oh, I know I'm going to develop later and look like you." And my mom had to explain to her,
No.
"Oh no, sweetheart,
No.
you're going to have to pay for these."
Yeah,
bad boys."
much later.
Yeah.
It's got to be a nuisance. I've known a lot of people who got breast reduction
Yeah.
in my life. It's got to be tough.
Yeah.
Having boobs, period.
It's a fine balance.
Big boobs. Tova doesn't complain about her boobs too much. I have a joke where in the joke she has small boobs. It's for a bit.
Uh-huh.
And then that's the one joke she makes me correct. She says, you have to say on stage after that that I have big tits. I'm like, okay, I'll give you that one. Well, we're going to talk so much comedy. So my father, not very comedically inclined. He likes Naked Gun.
All of them.
All of them.
They're
Like
great.
he
All three.
likes.
The first one's good.
Yeah, I don't think you could tell the difference.
Yeah, and the first one I saw was the last one because I was a kid when it came out. So in my head, that one's good because I saw it when I was a kid.
Yeah, there is
And O.J.
that
Simpson's
level.
in it. That's funny.
There's that level of comedy. Like he should watch all the murders in the building. Like that level still exists.
Yeah.
That Steve. I know Naked Gun's not Steve Martin, but it might as well be. I mean, it's the same. Like it's like funny, goofy, slapsticky. But this is why my dad like can't. I did a bad joke I was doing morning news for a spot. It was over Zoom and I couldn't see the other guy. So I was just talking to a void while I was on camera. Nightmare.
Yeah.
And at some point I tried throwing in a joke. He was very professional. And I said something about like, oh, yeah, come see a show. He's like, how are you liking Chicago? Oh, a woman came last night. She said not only was it her first comedy show, it was also her last. He laughed and I go, she had cancer. And then he just kind of froze. And then they said, all right, join. So my dad heard this. And he calls me and he says, I saw you on the news talking about some woman who had cancer. And I said, oh, no, it was just a joke. And he said, do you know anyone who has cancer? I was like, I was like, and I tried joking again. I said, well, the woman from the joke, but she's dead now. And he said, what? And I said, never mind. And then he said, oh, and then he started listing every
People with
person he
cancer?
knows with cancer and what stage it is and how devastating it's been to their life. And it's that kind of brokenness that you can't make that laugh.
That is a Steve Martin quote that is also sometimes attributed to Stephen Colbert, which is when you're younger, you make a lot of jokes about cancer, then you start having friends that have cancer and you stop, which is interesting. It's like he knew. He was paraphrasing that Steve Martin thing, knowing you would bring up Steve Martin as examples.
Sure. That is an interest. People say that. My dad's always said that with, I certainly have a number of pedophile jokes. And I think for him, it's almost as if he visualizes it. A lot of my jokes, some of them are really much wordplay twists. It's the twist of the expectation. And if you're someone who visualizes it, of course, you're going to feel like, ugh. But I don't know. I don't know. What do you think that's as you'll get older, as you've gotten older, do you think there's certain things that you're like, oh, well, we don't need to joke about that?
No, usually when I feel that way, it's more about me in the moment than the actual joke. It's like I'm being sensitive to something right now. Not all the time, but in general, if I were to hear a random cancer, a normal cancer joke, I think and I was dealing with it in my life at the moment, and it bothered me. I think my instinct would be to shy away from it in the moment, but I would know that that's just bothering me because it relates to me right now.
Sure.
Not that it's a problem with the joke, is how I kind of feel.
Let me ask you, since this is the downside, and you wrote about your brother in the book, how do you feel about suicide jokes?
Well, he didn't die of suicide. But
forgive me.
It's okay.
Oh, my God, I misread that part.
He died of a drug overdose. But
forgive me.
It's okay.
God, I feel like a jackass. And how do you feel about drug overdose jokes?
I think I was thinking about this while you were saying, because I was like, I have a high standard for jokes regardless, right? And jokes about sensitive subjects, especially because it's like the juice worth the squeeze is how I think of it, which is like, is the sort of energy that you're putting into it by talking about a subject that's sensitive, is it worth whatever the punchline is and or whatever relief you're giving those people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So would my standard be I don't know, it hasn't happened yet. No one's made a joke in that area. Then I was like, oh no, I'm sensitive, so I can't laugh the same way. But I think I was probably, I don't want to make it seem like I'm overly sensitive because it's almost not that. I'm mostly like, okay, what is the math of this joke? And is it fine?
Sure.
But if it's Taylor Thompson has jokes about her mom dying of cancer, and my mom passed away of cancer when I was younger. And I like those jokes. I feel like I relate to those jokes. I think my relief for a person who does joke in that area from the position of experiencing the same thing as I do, my reaction I think is larger. I think I experienced that, but I don't think I don't know. I think if anything, you know what? I think I would be more resentful of the comedian if they do a bad joke about the area.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be like, I wouldn't clutch any pearls. I don't do that, but I would be like,
or if the joke
I think it's more like when it's easy and it's not that insightful and not that funny.
Yeah.
You could then
unlike the one I did on the news, which was deep and meaningful.
No, but do you know what I mean?
It was flippant. It wasn't an attempt at
that joke to me sounds so joke-like, and so that I would not invest into that enough.
Yes, yeah, exactly,
Sure.
exactly.
My dad will invest so
and I think
quickly.
that's interesting.
You wouldn't. But that's also that's why I'd say he's mentally ill or so much of an open wound that it's just ready for an infection to take place. It's just a big I tried to get him to watch The Sopranos.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, and the pilot episode is him trying to figure out a home for his mom.
Yeah.
And my dad's like, I can't watch this, and I'm like, I think you'd be better if you just tried to think
just
and
tell
feel.
me that they get along at some point.
Instead, what does he want to do? He wants to talk about other people's cancers.
What does he do for a living?
He is no. It's fine. I mean, God,
it's just sort of this is a fascinating person to me, and I'm like, because
he's fascinating. He's very frustrating. Very frustrating.
I like
human being.
hearing how different people process art, right? Because people's brains are so different. I can't visualize almost anything. So when I hear jokes, I do the exact opposite your dad does. Because I literally, when I close my eyes, I can't picture anything. So it's just oh, cool. People are saying words.
Sure. First of all, I think
So it's
there's
like, is he a painter?
no. Well, first of all, let me just say there is a sense with like the kind of jokes that I like, which I would put in the Jesselneckian camp or the, how far back could we go with those one-liners? Anything too twisty, his brain cannot comprehend it quick enough to get it. He's confused.
Got it.
And then you explain it, and he goes, that's not funny though. He runs like a scrap metal recycling company that also does highway construction. Very complex stuff where you go, really, you can get that, but you can't get this joke. And workaholic, 20 different websites copywritten.
Yeah.
2 of them function. Was going to be in the marijuana selling industry, scrap metal recycling, building. During COVID, he helped like clean, all these companies.
Have you ever tried to print out your jokes and have them read them?
Sure. I could try it.
Because it's possible he's just not an auditory person.
Well, I'll add on to that. His hearing is not great either, and will not get hearing aids.
Yeah.
I've done everything I could. Will not do it.
Yeah, because it's possible that the timing of your joke, it actually enters his brain at different timing because he hears it slightly less. So it takes his brain an extra 0.1 seconds to be like, oh, the word he just said was cancer. And that alone changes the timing of the joke. But maybe if he reads it, you'll be like, okay, so there's this one other show. Oh, that's something she's the last.
Well, now next time I have a joke bomb on stage, I'm going to be like, all right, can we get the printers?
Turn up the hearing
Clearly, this audience is not auditory humorists.
How important is it for you that your dad thinks you're funny?
Not important at all. It's not important at all. It's just like our conversations are really rough and lack substance and details. And for him, they repeat. Kind of like he goes down these, like if I bring up his father, who I never met, he goes kind of like a point for point. Oh, my father, he was a horrible man. He cheated on your grandmother, and he'll say like almost like a little speech, and where it's kind of like broken, and I'm like, well, give me a detail. Tell me about one woman he fucked. You tell me one specific story that we can expand on. But instead, it's this, and
it's like the script of who his father was. To him.
And I don't know if it's because if he talks more, it'll get too much. I don't know if his like memory's not fully there. But I get bored. I get so I'm like going nuts. And it's also he's like so depressed. So every conversation. I mean, that cancer thing had happened before. I looked at the phone before it hit 1 minute. Before it hit 1 minute of the phone call, he was listed 2 people that were dying of cancer, and I'm like, that I can't do this.
Yeah.
And then just hop up at the cellar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Other than the depressed part, I was like, this is a fascinating subject. Like to have a like boring sort of rote story about his life that's like so dramatically told. I'm like, that's like do a show where you're just like punching up his stories.
I mean, that's
like
a lot of my stand-up. I mean,
like
it is.
You do like crowd work with your dad for the audience later.
Yeah, and he's a huge part of my stand-up. I he had some hard stuff. I have a big chunk about his quintuple bypass.
Yeah,
and I think there's been certain moments where I go like, fuck, man, I've written too much about my father. That I have the thought of whenever he passes away, that I know I will have, that any comedian, any artist, if they're being honest with anyone, will say like there is a thought of like, oh fuck, I built my thing around you being alive and being frustrating and being in this moment. It's tough, man.
But like, I mean, there's so much potential there. Like, look at Maria, right? Maria Bamford has an act where there's a lot of things going on, but a lot of it was talking about her mother and a little bit her father and her sister. And like, I made her write about it in the book. When her mother passes away, it's like a great character in literature passes away or whatever, because she was so embodied in her performance. So then she had to work on it, but then she figured out how to tell her audience about how her mother passes away while still, and even now she does like, she's always doing something, but like, I feel like she does Zoom shows or something where she does just her mother. And she'll just like do the character of her mother just as the entire show, like answering questions or something like that.
Do you mind if I do just my father? and it's an hour-long Zoom where it lists people who are
problematic,
dying of cancer.
too.
Oh, it would be very problematic.
Yeah.
I'd be like, let me tell you the Halloween costume I did when I was 6 years old.
Yeah,
I'd be like,
that's
okay, no more.
Yeah. Or and when I interviewed Lil Rel, he used to do an impression of his mother that was very loving, and then after she passed away, he realized he can't do it anymore. It's too hard because when he does a character, they're there in him or whatever. You know, like some people when they do characters on stage, some comedians truly they're like, I'm not me anymore. I'm this person, right? Same thing. I imagine actors. There are those actors who are like, the me that has left. I'm now my mother, and it's like it's like she's on stage, and I then can't do the rest of the show. So it's an interesting thing to wrestle with.
This is the downside.
You're listening to The Downside
The Downside.
with Gianmarco Soresi.
I want to apologize again. Let me just say, before you came, I literally was like, because I had read this.
Yeah.
I gave it to Russell. Went to avoid. Didn't see it again. I put a calendar reminder to get it back. And
Again,
and you can attest to this. I said, I know he had a brother who died, and Russell was talking to me as I was looking for it in the back.
Yeah.
Because I knew it was in the later part of the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Partly because I was, you know, I had so many thoughts, and then I got to that. I said, okay, well, he's a human being. Don't be mad at this comedy critic. But I literally, when you rang, and then Russell was going on and on about foreign affairs, and so when I said it, I was like, God damn it! I swear to fuck it. So just so you know, I did read it.
Yes.
My memory's bad,
It is bad.
like my father.
Sure.
And I apologize.
No, it's okay. I honestly, I've been doing some press, and like because the ending of the book is one, the end. Two, it is some people find it moving or whatever, or just like it's a lot at the end. They want to talk about it, but they're very scared to talk about the end of the book. So they sort of like talk this way about it. They'll be like, and you know, in the ending, there's a part at the end, and maybe if you want to talk, but you do know, like, and then they're like, and it's so frustrating
Because I think of it, I know from an artist's perspective, I'm like, he put it in the book. It's fair game.
Yeah. It's definitely fair game. I mean, like, I put it at the end of the book because I was like,
That should be your test, by the way, for people who didn't read it. Have the brother. You should have the brother in the beginning. So if you know people didn't finish, they go, "So your brother? What did he think of it?"
Yeah, but also I put it at the end because I was like, you need to have read the whole book to deserve to learn about my life.
Yes. Well, I should have said it for the end of the podcast. You have to listen to the whole podcast. Speaking of extra podcast stuff, join the Patreon, patreon.com/downside. We are now doing one bonus episode a month. We are posting our live episodes there. We recently posted our full episode with Kevin Allison, and we have one coming up with Ari Hershkowitz from the movie One of Us, I think, about leaving the Hasidic community in New York, and my comedy special, The Rats Are in Me, patreon.com/downside, link in bio. Now,
Okay.
I will say the one thing I've been thinking we did have Jason Cinnamon on the show.
I listened to that episode when it happened, and then again recently to prepare.
Oh yeah.
It's like, what's it going to be like?
Well, then Jason and we got into like a Twitter argument. He did not like a tweet that I said.
Recently?
I said a couple months ago, but I said fuck Jason Cinnamon and the New York Times. No, I said let me find it. I basically said. Hold on, I see. Oh my Jesus Christ! And the thing,
my God,
talking to you fucking writers is like I have a thought, and then I get an article back, and I'm like, well, now I got to read the article, and I got to respond, and this is your profession, and you know what? It's only fair. He should have to respond to me in my medium.
Sure.
We should have a stand-up debate.
Sure.
But the tweet that he did not like said something.
So many back and
tweets.
forth.
Yeah,
oh my God.
Oh my God! Because you know that I have to.
That is so long. You're gonna read all this to us?
No.
Oh.
I was just trying to find the original tweet. It was essentially saying comedy critics, people people see stand-up comedy that has no jokes. I wrote it better. Let me look it up. I phrased it really well.
At least I'm now prepared to know what part of it is, and then so we're gonna start with the no jokes part of it, which is good. I'm like both the most like lover of jokes and person who's like vows that stand-up doesn't need as many jokes as people think it does.
Well, I'm just glad. I think we can have like. Obviously, this kind of conversation is hindered by the fact that I'm in this profession.
Yeah.
And like, there's so many opinions that I cannot share publicly. That
Because this comedian's like this and they're bad.
yes,
Got it.
and a lot of it is this is bad. This person is or this person is it's not good. I care about the art,
Sure.
the craft of the art form that I've literally dedicated my life to.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of people that are lauded or not that I would go, that's like bad. I think this hype is false. I think this hype is self-serving or to associate yourself with, and I can't do that.
Sure.
I can't get into specifics of that. And I'm also hindered by the fact that anyone can look at any of my opinions and go, someone didn't make the Vulture list this year. and that's fine. That's fine. Okay, I can't find it.
It's so funny. This is like, I was like, okay, what are the things I can imagine him bringing up and at what point?
I'm going to Eminem it. I'm going to get all this. I'm going to roast myself first.
it's like-
he never made the Vulture list. Ever. He's only been booked on the Vulture show once, and it was Jay Jordan.
Yeah, we don't book the show. Like, I help, but Matt books the show. So,
No, I don't.
come back. We can talk about the list whenever we want to talk about the list. But we want to talk about jokes first?
Well, for example, the list, that's what I mean. It's like the list is something I can't talk about because those are literally
Peers,
many friends and peers.
Yeah.
So basically the thing that so what I wanted to say is that I am trying to hold myself to account because I feel like, and I've talked about it many times, we had like a psychic on. And this is a very skeptical podcast, at least for me. Russell, he'll believe
I'm not
it.
a skeptical.
He hears a noise. Oh, it must be my great grandmother saying hi, Russell.
I'm on Russell's side.
And it was this thing of like, I realized with the psychic, and this is me joking. I realized with the psychic that there was no way for me to politely undermine someone's entire profession.
Sure, yeah.
Because to say someone's profession is a scam
Sure.
there's no cute way to go about that if you're being honest. And so ultimately, I capitulated, and by the end we both got readings, which to me, looking for myself, I'm like, you failed in holding up your values.
Yeah.
Now I don't feel that same degree.
Sure, good.
With comedy critics.
And to be fair, if you say comedy critics, blah, 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 you mean me and Jason. So it's...
Well, that's another point. I understand there's a degree of when you have a limited, when it's not 100 critics.
Yeah.
Part of your job, correct me if I'm wrong, is also just to hype up and highlight the existence and wonders of comedy. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few reasons, but one is I realized fairly early on that so many people don't even know that you could take any comedian seriously, that part of it is just sort of like helping them understand what good can look like, right? So that's like the first goal. And then also you're like trying to bring in people who are skeptical because they only have one idea what a comedian is and they don't like that idea to be like, look, there's all these different types of comedians. I think for me also personally, I don't write reviews. I haven't written a review in a really, really long time because I don't like writing it. It is like a form of writing that I don't like to say this is good and this is bad because when I was confronted with the job of ranking comedians or saying what good and bad is, I think I would do a year-end specials list, or I did a year-end SNL list where I consulted a colleague and they had a completely different list of 10. And I was like, this is so subjective. And my experience as a person who watches 200 specials a year is so unrelatable to a person who watches 2 that I got in my own head that it's like, my perspective is not useful to you. Now, that's probably incorrect. There's a value, but I do think what I land on, and which I write about in the book, is there are value systems that people have for what good looks like that a comedian almost can't comprehend or shouldn't, because if you're doing it, if you're an artist, you have to believe you're doing it the correct way to keep on doing it, because it is hard to put yourself out there. And that's what we need artists to do, is to say, this is what I think funny looks like. And if you don't do that, then you're failing. Our job is to not judge comedy only by one standard of what funny can look like or what stand-up could look like. And then when you zoom out enough, then you're like, there's no rules whatsoever, and that makes it more interesting to write about, or
but I think what happens in that zooming out.
Or yes.
And we have theater episodes, we have comedy episodes, and this is a comedy episode, folks. If you hate stand-up comedy, I don't know how you like me, but next episode. I think what happens is you zoom out so much, and the rules becomes, it becomes so free form that in fact it goes to the point that one neglects great joke construction and traditionally great stand-up comedians, and sometimes gets lost in the weeds of this was a totally new perspective. This was really weird. And I sometimes look at that weird stuff and I go, I think this is weird and bad. And sure, one could accuse me of, you're just not open to these forms. And I say, I think I am open to these forms. But I also think that, like, and then suddenly you sound like a conservative person going, funny is funny. And I would say that Russell and I, we have a lot of comedic agreements, and our texts are often filled with, do you want to name the names? Or our texts are often filled with certain people that give Vulture, and we go like, I think this is a scam. I think people have been tricked, and I think there is a niche bubble that happens in the New York world or in the LA world where it's like, this is cool to this very small segment, and in fact, Earthquake should be on more of these lists.
Sure.
And I sometimes see the way that you hold, Seinfeld and those legends up here, and then tell me, when was the last time you went to the Cellar?
Yeah, I don't not
sure, but that's my point.
Yeah.
My point is that you and I'm not gonna be a jackass the whole time, but I want to get
I
it
was
out of the way.
expecting this. I was expecting the question also how often I go to Cellar, and it's the reasons I don't, which is one, I live in Brooklyn. Two, I have a family and it's nighttime, and three, too many comedians are doing things to me that are hacky that it is annoying to watch.
When was the last time you went?
I don't know, a year ago or so.
Sure. I think the lineup at the Cellar is more diverse.
Sure.
And it could be the particular show that you're going to. But I also think, like, when I see the praise of the Seinfelds, of the people who literally went through this system, that in my mind, there's a certain degree of neglect or a certain degree of, like, that's the old thing. That's club comedy. And while praising the big rich fucking people who, by the way, most of them, 99%, are not making good stuff anymore. And they're held up here, but the people who are in their gyms are viewed as, like, old school or hacky. And I always said, and I've said this to Jay, and I'll say it again, I've said on this podcast, there was an article once that listed Jay as, like, he's alt and he's club.
Yeah.
Jay is club. I am club. We are both club comedians. And my argument was, people are saying he's alt because he's a beautiful black man. But he's not alt by any stretch of the imagination.
Yes, I also think
I love you, Jay.
Look, I love Jay.
I know.
Good for him that he can get labeled as alt.
Sure.
But I think one, our understanding of what alt means now is beyond people in this room or rooms like this. There's so little alt as much as there was 10 years ago. And even what happened 10 years, so like alt comedy, which was invented, let's say in 1990, was definitely different than what was happening in clubs. And then that kept on going through, let's say...
Some of that became club. I mean, Mark Maron was alt, and Maron is a club comic now.
Yeah, but I mean, you feel like... I talked to, like, Bert Kreischer and, like, Tom Segura were doing what was alt comedy at a time, which is sort of a story and blah, blah, blah. And also, but if you look at sort of what I would say third wave alternative comedy, which was, like, the Pete Holmes generation and, like, John Mulaney and stuff like that, which is just, which was really just at a time when the clubs were particularly... not letting anyone in who was not a certain thing. So then a lot of what we think of as like stand-ups, not alt, not club, they just do stand-ups. We're just doing alt rooms by default. And I do think that standard is mostly the standard that's kept up, which is alt is just the people who have not gotten into the clubs yet. Now the clubs are getting better at who they book, both in terms of just sort of both diversity of a demographic, but also diversity of types of stand-up they're doing. Like, I think that's definitely the case, and I think they probably realize that. But I also think there are so few true alt people left, like doing weird things. Like when I think of alt, it's not like I do think because there was that small window where alt was defined by like a movement of queer comedians, that you're like, oh, well, queer people are alt, and then alt straight people are
sure.
Yeah. But I don't think that's the case anymore because I do think a lot of queer comedians are doing like down the middle stand-up.
Well, I'll also say this. I think because stand-up has become so over-flooded with people that, like, I will hear stories about Patrice, like, walking rooms and still getting booked. And I go, that's a different time.
Yeah.
If I walked a room once, twice, some of these clubs, I might not walk a room. And alt requires you're going to be failing a lot. You're going to be failing a lot, figuring it out. Some audiences are just not going to like you.
Yeah.
And we live in such a competitive sphere that if you are that kind of comedian, there are 10 great comedians behind you who want to break into that room. But I think my frustration with again, it's like kind of labeling the Cellar as easily as I think you have, that you don't see, for example, Jeffrey Asmus, who is a club comic who I'm like, this is one of the great fucking joke writers of our time. And instead, this person is going around the country building up this base, and someday, later on, he'll have the special, blah, blah, blah. But it's like they're there now. And sometimes I see people who aren't on these lists, and I don't just mean Vulture, but I mean like also these end of the year lists.
Sure,
where
yeah.
It feels like a mix of gigantically famous people, where I'm like, it feels like this was just to include the famous person, and it feels sometimes like a clutching for survival. I think every news publication is. So you want to share some big celebrities so that it's mentioned in the things, and when people look up their name, they see the article. Mixed with cool kids, some of whom are very funny, and Jay Jordan is a hilarious stand-up comedian. And then sometimes somewhere I'm like, I feel like this is more about being cool than it is about being funny. And then someone goes, well, your definition of fun. And I go, okay, well then let's just throw it all up in the air, and there's no such thing as funny. So then what's the point?
Sure. So there's two things. One, I think a lot of critics generally, but like I can say for me, we've heard enough jokes that when we see a comedian who's doing jokes, we want more vision from them. Like,
Sure.
and to me, joke writing is the craft of stand-up comedy, and it's a wonderful craft. But sometimes I see joke writers without vision, and I'm like, sure, you can paint a perfect picture of what a house or a flower looks like, but you're not doing anything artistically interesting for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and then, however, now,
and I would include when I bring up Asmus, when I say
I'm not familiar with
I don't
him.
mean like, I'm not saying he just does jokes. I also think it's that.
Sure.
I think it's a unique.
I'm happy, and I'll look into it. But
Look into it. I promise.
But and right now there also is a lot of comedians with vision without craft whatsoever, and I do think that's partly because of a breakdown because of COVID. Lots of people who had vision realize they don't even have to do stand up anymore, and they're like, oh, I can just have a TikTok account where I essentially can get my comedy out.
Sure.
What you don't need as much sort of like hard craft of like how I manipulate this audience. So usually the sort of best people sort of mix an amount of both, and I am nervous that we currently don't have a system that is going to create such comedians, because like, you know, if I think of Maria Bamford as the best comedian alive or the greatest comedian alive, that is my standard to give a sense. She was able to maintain her vision of what a comedian is while also figuring out how to translate to a larger audience than just the people who are okay in a small room or small bubble or whatever.
It was a workhorse.
Yeah.
I mean, like number of shows, meeting with people.
Yeah, she figured out a way to do it, right? She's like, I need to work on material. I don't want to have to go to the store because I don't like the energy. I'll just do stand up for one person at a time for 3 years or whatever.
Yes.
But also like Tig. I think Tig is incredible. And Tig, but like, and she came up from a certain sort of situation. Now, I do think, I think one, when you're writing, it's hard to just be like, here's the sort of text of a joke, and this is what makes it interesting or not. And it's hard to think of an example like this person that I've not seen, but like, if there's more to it, there is more to it.
And you can understand from my perspective why I go like, because this is not, and again, it's not just as one person. I could list more, but I'm
Let's
like,
talk about
I'm
Earthquake, because Earthquake is more famous, so it's easier to be like, because like,
Sure.
I love Earthquake. I did Earthquake in my podcast, and I was able to talk about, and like, I think
how that goes. Is that intimidating? I did a show of his. I've talked about it before on SiriusXM, and I drank at 2 p.m. because I was so nervous, and that's not what I do.
Yeah.
he was cool. I mean, like,
I'm not Russell.
I got lucky that people told him he should do my show and that like it would be worth his time. So he then went into it not being defensive.
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly he realized I like appreciated him, not just like appreciate him on a level that interviewers tend to not, which is like how I'm able to do my job in general, which is that like most comedians are doing something and they don't think anyone notices.
Why isn't Earth? Because I see what year did Earthquakes come out? 2022 or was it the year before?
Yeah, it was either 2 years. Why was it?
2021 or
Look,
20.
I didn't make that list.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking specific. It was not a Vulture list. It was a different list. But I just remember looking at it and there was some just like it was like some of the most famous comedians in
You're
the
thinking of
world.
the New York Times list that one year.
Yeah, I wasn't saying it.
He does-
But yes,
We
you're
were
right.
Didn't we talk about it with
He doesn't know a rank list. He does like a thing of note list, right? Because he doesn't do a top.
It's not a rank, but it was like,
Here, things of note. Why was an Earthquake on that list? You'd have to ask him. I think it being not an hour long is a thing that might rub people the wrong way. I don't know why, but it's sort of like I remember this. It was just sort of a weird length, and I think also it's possible the value system of the people making lists are reviewing specials. They're not reviewing comedians, right? So they're like, part of a special is like, how does it look? Especially now, because people do make specials that look like something.
Can I also say that I do think that some of it is this same separation of club comedy and alti Brooklyn comedy, because especially in like black rooms around the country, I feel like that enters more the sphere of club comedy. And so when club comedy gets relegated as kind of this like traditionalist thing, or seen as a way that it's not particularly insightful, or it leans on this, that, or the other, then suddenly you've not just you. I mean the whole
If
comedy
anything, I
ecosystem.
think I am more anti the idea of club comedy than almost anyone I know. So it's fine to say me.
Sure.
Because most people don't care about this. This is a battle that I had to fight like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Now people don't really care about this. Most people just go to the Comedy Cellar and it's fine or whatever. Or now Union Hall books many more people that I would consider club comedians, more so than you as a club comedian. People who I'm like, this person would exist in only this world, and their fan base would only exist in this world. But right now, there's sort of a fluidity. I think it's partly because Gen Z does not have such. They don't have the context of physical spaces the same as we do, right? And so I think there's like, there are comedians that do it, and they find it what they find it. I think like whatever hipster cred that I liked is of a different era, and I do think it's very useful to rebuild it just so we have divisions. So then you can be like, well, they're doing this thing, which is not necessarily better or worse. It's a personal preference, and they're doing this thing, it's not better or worse. And the audience expectations are different, and then it allows comedians to operate in certain situations. But I do think I think there's an orthodoxy that exists in comedy clubs, especially outside of New York and LA, but especially outside of New York. I think LA clubs, do have this problem, which is like, you're playing to an audience with a specific expectation.
LA comedians have a lot of problems, and one of the main ones is lack of jokes. But
But so
it's alt, it's the worst of alt and club in one.
But so it's like there's the Comedy Cellar expectation, right? So it's like, especially this is the prime problem with the Comedy Cellar, I'd say, or the Comedy Cellar as an ideal, which is, one, it really matters if you can perform there. That's a really big deal. It helps you professionally tremendously as a comedian. Two, that audience can be intimidating and impatient, more so than anything else. So then it expects the comedian, to engage with that audience in a combative way.
That's too far for me. Impatience is part of the art form. It's part of what you admire about Def Comedy Jam, or the Apollo, or that style. And my problem is that when something gets labeled as this club comedy, I would argue it's also pushing away from being recognized a lot of black comics, an entire circuit, and I'm not in that circuit. I just know about the intricacy of the circuit, and as a performer, I will see some comics that would never be included in a Vulture or a New York Times list, and I go, this guy or woman is fucking amazing.
Yes.
And I will add on top of that, where I think there's also been a conflation of funny and liberalism, and I say this as fucking liberal cuck as they come, that even more isolates a certain group. Like I'll give an example, and I want to say it delicately, but it's something I noticed. Certainly, I worked at LOL. There were I know I know its reputation. I'm not singing any praises. I have an episode coming out soon where we just shit all over it. But there were, let's say, 2 black comics that I think are really astounding. Really astounding. Now, when they're on stage, they might say the F word.
Sure.
They might say the F word.
The F slur.
The F slur.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, we're saying fuck here.
I was like, they say fuck? That's too far for me.
They're saying the F slur, and I would argue there's a degree where that alone
Yeah.
would mean they're not going up at Butterboy anytime soon.
Yeah.
Or if they ever did, it would be a and it would be over. And that which I think it's I'm certainly not advocating for non-gay people to say the F slur,
Sure.
but I'm saying that a value system was also partially created and fostered and agreed upon in a certain segment of society. And thus, if you have someone in a different segment of society, and I don't mean this obviously of black people, I mean this of someone who came from a different part of America, where now they can no longer even entertain and mingle in the lists, because these lists, if they just existed as like cool,
Yeah.
that's great. They impact people's careers, their livelihood, the agencies that want to meet with them, the Just for Laughs, the this, that, and the other. It's all an ecosystem. And I would argue that the isolation of club comedy, you could make an argument that not only does it carve out a certain kind of comedian, but it also prevents an integration of comedy and could be harmful down. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I
that's my
think
point.
there's a few things there. One, one second.
Quick, say the F, sir.
Oh my God.
No, I mean, I think the sort of the history and separation of black comedy, not meaning comedy done by black people, but comedy done in black rooms,
Yeah.
has been pervasive for the history of comedy, and partly not just because white people don't want it, partly because there are black comedians who do not want to be exposed to being white famous, right? Or like they just don't want to be part of that. There's a lot of comedians who I've asked to interview and they just don't want to deal with it, right? And I do think it's because they intrinsically understand their comedy exists in a certain context and actually have no interest in translating that comedy for different rooms. That is always the thing, which is like you can do whatever you want up into the sort of context you want to exist in, right? Which is and context means the sort of language expectations or something like that. Now, if you want to appeal to people who exist in a different context, then you're probably going to have to placate certain sort of expectations in that context. And a lot of comedians can do it, right? Like, I'm trying to think of it. There are black comedians that go up and down all the different rooms for whatever, right? I do agree that there is a media blind spot to that entire segment of comedy, partly because it does not happen in New York and LA. A lot of it happens in Atlanta, and there's not journalism covering it in the same way.
I would also say it happens at the Cellar.
I think I think most comedians that are bubbling up at the Cellar, I find out about them in time, at the same way as anything else, which I find about them in time. There are, it's not like there are not black comedians that perform in what we consider alternative rooms,
Of course.
and not black comedians on these lists. But I do understand what you're saying, which is like, I do think of the many reasons, what we consider of alternative did become like a political divide, more so than even a style divide, which is frustrating to me because I do prefer it as a style divide more than a political divide. But that is just the nature of like where society has gone, and ultimately, I think probably to a sort of bifurcation of comedy of club and alt is abandoned to like a 9 zillion people, right? Like I think to a Gen Z person, they would have no idea there's 2 styles of comedy because like if you don't live in New York, you just be like, there's 9 million. I wouldn't even know there's these 2 styles.
Yeah, I just follow these people on TikTok.
And they might only think club comedy exists because for the most part, only club comedy, that's the comedy people know. That's the comedy that's just played on TV in terms of just like what a room looks like. It's a club and people pay drinks or whatever. That's if you live in most cities, that's the comedy you go see because there's not alternative rooms that can be sustained in most places. I think it is, and that's part of an issue. Like our list is made up because we poll people. We paid like over 100 people.
Sure.
And those people are largely industry people and like indie bookers broadly defined. We asked the Comedy Cellar, I believe they voted. I don't remember this year, but they usually suggest a certain amount of people. And then it is a reflection of that group of people. Now, that group of people is also, they have their own biases. They also are trying to tell the story of like what their life looks like, and they might shine lights on certain people more than other certain people. But also like they might not, those people might be people who also don't know who these black comedians are. And that is a problem. And it's a thing that we try to figure out how to get around. But I do think this I think we can keep on talking about this list, but I do think the question of jokes is useful because I do think you love jokes that are like jokes.
Listen.
That's your favorite thing is when a comedian does jokes that sound.
I love jokes, but don't get me wrong. I come from a theater background, and I don't say this as give me some points, but like I appreciated what Nanette was, and I'm not saying wow, look at me, but I'm saying like I understood what it was. I understand why one of the funniest Nanette videos I've ever saw it was Nanette at the Apollo, and they just coupled like her jokes. I can look at that and I can go, these jokes about the color blue are pretty weak, but this overall piece and the significance and the arc, I see it. Now, I'm not going to share my thoughts on Douglas. Wait,
I had something to say though.
Which we watched together.
We did watch together. I feels like this. Feels like it is important for both of these worlds to exist. It's important, and I think what it feels like is that there used to be more crossover. There used to be.
There was a time where there's less crossover, then there was more crossover, and now there's. I don't even know when you think of an alt comedian now. Like I don't even know who you'd point to.
Right.
I think like Julio Torres is a very successful.
I think of him as the generation before.
I agree too. I agree. But I feel. I mean, I remember having a conversation with Minnie Tucker, and she was talking about how it felt like there used to be more. I mean, if you think about Mulaney, like if Mulaney was labeled like third wave alt, he also
only me.
But he wasn't in a space.
And maybe Jason knows, but I meant like literally, this is not even like a comedy nerd conversation because most people aren't looking at it this detached.
No, for sure.
But go make your point.
Just saying, like I feel like both are important in the ideal world, if there was more crossover and if we were highlighting things from both, that you could be in an alt space and be able to push boundaries and things, and then you could also be in the other space and have a little pressure to get some laughs here and there, because I feel like that is sometimes what's missing. It feels like I do think it both alone are limiting. Like
if you just have to kill, you're going to be a fucking hack road comic. But I do think, and I think like where sometimes comedy criticism can get up its own ass is where I go, oh, but none of these jokes were good at all, or the whole act is weak. And then sometimes I think people from the outside, they watch a special, they go, wow, I didn't laugh. It is important to be funny. That is the premise of the art form of comedy.
Look, I think you're conflating a few things, which is one, jokes being good and a comedian being funny. And as I write in the book, I do not equate jokes as the art of doing comedy. Jokes is a pathway, and I do think there's an over-reliance on jokes in white club comedians, like because unlike
what do you mean by that statement?
Yeah,
what do you mean by that statement?
Because I do think
I don't mean bad. I don't just mean you have to go knock. Who's like you can expand and explore.
Sure,
but I mean the literal the. To me, what you said is like I think people rely on words too much for book writing, and I go like no, that's what it is.
And I'm saying that to me, jokes broadly defined is the pathway in which a comedian communicates their funniness to the audience, and ultimately, now if they're well constructed that might help in that process, but it doesn't necessarily need the construction. Is ultimately a pathway for an audience to get the funny energy of a comedian. Now, if a comedian has nothing like a joke and they're just sort of talking and telling through the beats of a story and they know the rhythms or whatever, that comedian can be doing a good job. I am not judging ultimately there are some comedians, while I will judge the craft of the joke because that's their value system and that is interesting of them. But there are other comedians who are joke light that I think are very effectively communicating the comedic thing that they are to the audience without the need for set up punchlines or anything close to set up punchlines. I think both can exist, but I do think if you're listening to, I'm trying to think of the best example of someone who is very funny but is not, like, I would say, I don't know, like, I have to rewatch her last special to see if it's like, but like I think like Beth Stelling does not often do things that sound like jokes. But you can say each piece is a joke, whatever. But she's very funny. But I think she is incredibly good at communicating the comedic idea of Beth Stelling to an audience. She's incredible.
But I think her joke writing, I think her style is just more. It reminds me there was something when they did the Ricky Gervais, Louis C.K. Seinfeld and whatever, where Ricky was saying something to Louis about I don't know if I'm taking this from your book. Am I taking this from your book?
We'll see.
It was the idea where Ricky was like, I love what you do because it's like you're not even telling jokes. You're just, and Louis was like, oh no, I'm totally doing what Seinfeld's doing, but with my own style.
Yeah.
And I would say that about Beth Stelling. I think one of the reasons Beth Stelling is I've never met her, but beloved by the club community too, is because there are jokes in there. It's just some people are less transparent about their delivery.
And I think that white club comedians, especially white male club comedians, are
half Jewish, half Italian, white club comedians.
But I do think are more reliant on jokes that sound like jokes. And then are shorter. And in that shortness, they are limiting the audience's exposure to who they really are. That is my critique. That would be my critique of club comedians who only do clubs and think the idea of playing an alt room is for lazy people who just where nothing happens, which is not even true anymore. That standard doesn't exist. But I do.
Are there some alt comedians that are lazy and are just telling broad stories without the teeth?
So many comedians are lazy. I feel like almost every comedian I talk to has figured out a way of working as little as possible. But now,
would you say that about me, Russell?
No.
Do I strike you as a comedian? No. I read this whole goddamn book.
But I do think that they are like, oh, let me figure out a process that works with my brain, and ultimately, and then work hard in whatever that is. But a lot of those people are not like, I'm just going to sit down, or I'm going to like shave it down to whatever. It's going to be. They're going to be in front of people and figure out in front of people.
I agree. I think there still is a degree of I can understand. And I understand not fully a thing of taste.
Yeah.
I like well-constructed jokes, I think, because I've seen a lot, and I admire the beauty of a well-constructed joke. I am going to see, hopefully, if no flights get canceled, Jesselnick at Carnegie Hall. I haven't seen much of this, and for me, that's my heaven. Seeing Mulaney at City Winery, that's the kind of thing that I love to see, and Maria Bamford, because I know I'm going to get a lot of jokes. I like that.
So when Jesselnick tells a longer story, you're like, I'd rather him not be doing that.
No. Oh, Thoughts. Listen, I will sing the praises that Thoughts and Prayers is one of the greatest comedy specials of all time, and it's because of the story and the opinion that he shared on Thoughts and Prayers before it was a common trope of talking about that. I'm not anti-story, but I think what I feel as someone who loves jokes and who, you clearly, what's your podcast called?
Yeah, podcast. I love jokes.
Sure, but
so much so that I feel like I love jokes in a way where I can
self-hating
like,
joke lover.
I want to. It's so easy to defend jokes because they're like around, and people have such a rigid idea of comedy, which is jokes, which is like. So then they're like, because
that's like saying people have such a rigid concept of musicals singing. Yeah, that's part of the art form.
Well,
but I feel like you just mean laughs, right? Or you just mean like actually make you laugh. Or you? I mean, I know you love joke.
Yeah,
I think we both. Yeah, jokes isn't brought. Look,
I like your comedy. I've never seen you tell a fucking joke in your entire life.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
It becomes it's hard because I think people have an idea of jokes, which is the thing that they read in joke books as kids. Then they're like, things that sound more like jokes comedians do, and then there are clearly a joke for a comedian is like a piece or whatever. And I try to define jokes broadly, right? An act out is a joke. It can be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think people sometimes define jokes too literally. So then I often push back on jokes so people don't keep on defining literally. They'll be like, oh, X sitcom doesn't have any jokes. It's like, well, they do. It's just the character's behavior is the laugh moment. It's just not, they're like, and that's like a cross between a blah, blah, blah and a blah, blah, blah.
I think the part of me that prickles is that first of all, I know some comics that I would go, oh, it's just jokey, that I don't like, or that it's quick, or that I'm like, this is just for the shock value, or I think this was a Joel Kim Booster tweet way back in the day of like, I can't tell if something's funny on Twitter or I just connected to disparate things.
Yeah.
And I know that. But I think I almost feel, I hate to use the word, almost offended because it's the craft that I love.
Yeah.
Where I go like, oh, you think I can't paint a picture with the tool that I've chose to fine tune? And in fact, it's as if there's a belittling of the tool that I would argue is one of the main bricks of the thing that you love. And furthermore, that you praise of these older comedians that you praise because it was part of your childhood when you were less observant and just laughing and enjoying stuff. And now in this medium, the people of my generation and younger, it's viewed as almost a degree of like really jokes again. And I think their jokes are beautiful.
This is why. And I've noticed that people are doing more jokes now, things that sound like jokes, than they had in any time in my going to see shows in the last 15 years. Like things that sound like jokes where they have a joke ending. And I think there's a variety of reasons for it. But I'll explain why I'll say it sounds old school, which is, as you said, the people I praise for doing it were when I was a kid, which was 25 years ago. If you're doing, in any other art form, if you're doing the art that was cutting edge 25 years ago now, you would be seen as doing old art. Now, and that's how I view it, which is art, which is like representative.
But it's not. But again, to go back to my metaphor, that's like saying people who do musicals where you sing,
No.
you're still singing. Jokes are what a singing. It's
Seinfeld's
a
doing the
limerick.
same thing Don Rickles was doing. I mean,
He's doing an iteration on it because he was doing more observations and things.
I'm not doing what Seinfeld's doing. Well, I'm happy to compare like our things. Do they twist? Sure, but then at some point, what in 100 years to be an original comedian, you have to just make noises with your nose.
No, it's the idea that musicals are singing. I'd be like, dude, I don't know enough. I'm not fluent enough in the progression of musical theory, of musical hits. But I assume there are like tonal decisions that were different. I imagine there are decisions that like I don't know the difference.
It's still music. It's
sure, but look in classical music, right? There's a person who did a piece that there was no sound, right? It's John Cage, whatever the amount of minutes it is. Now, was he saying this is the best piece of classical music ever? No, but that was a revolutionary thing that's very worth writing about. I think the easier example is fine art, right? What I write about mostly in the book.
Sure.
Which is, in 18 whatever, painters were shown a photograph and realized they are free not to paint as representationally anymore. However, and then all of what we think of as modern art is the result of that progress and other technological advances and blah, blah. But that did not mean people stopped painting houses that looked like houses or flowers that painted like flowers. It just means that if you're writing from the perspective of like wanting to, as journalists are covering news, broadly defined, it means what is news, what is pushing the art form forward. That is sort of what you're asking us to do is essentially like review just things based on sort of like craft excellence.
Sometimes,
yes. Sure.
I think there's a value.
And I do that sometimes in the book.
Well, you do, but I also think I see you do it with things of the past, and I go like there are things of the present that are not the same thing, but it is the medium of comedy, and I think the reason I feel it personally is because I love that medium.
Sure.
I love that medium, and I see a praising of originality over quality sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Sometimes. I don't look at these lists and go, every single person is terrible on here. But that's my...
Yes, I do think that praising of originality over quality is an interesting thing that is the problem of, and I do believe is almost exactly what Jason said, which is there's only so many people doing this. and they have to write this compelling enough to people who are outsiders. And what is easy, and then so it's like, what can you write compelling about that make people invested and interested in what's happening in comedy? And that means, one, someone doing a great job at a thing that's been done before is a hard story to write. But two, they might not be interested in that part of it. They're more they want to know what's going on.
Sure.
If there was what you ultimately would need is a bunch of local comedy critics that review, like,
I love that.
but we're moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah, no.
So Jason and I are fighting for ultimately against an orthodoxy which says stand-up is the only art form that can't have anyone take it seriously at all. So as a result, we essentially have to write about the things that make it that convey that this is an art form. Now, that is beyond a craft. So it's harder to write about the craft part of it because we're often trying to make the case that it's an art form. There are few people that write about any art. This is a from musical theater to theater in general to writing to music criticism to film criticism. Very few people in their reviews are writing about it technically. That just does not exist. I don't know. Like, I can't think of another critic who's writing technical reviews of like the Scorsese movie and like, oh, how he uses mise-en-scene and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Because that's just not really how they write. You can do that maybe as deep dives. But it's like you're asking like architecture critics to like see John Architect, who's like the best house maker in Dayton, Ohio, and be like, that is fucking a perfect house.
Sure, but I also think perfect houses should be praised and not taken for granted.
That's a different
because then you're
job.
going to go, I like this house. Oh, it fell down, but it was cool while it stood up for 2 seconds.
That's a more interesting story than another good house.
I think what's hard is sometimes you look at things and you'll be like, I don't believe that someone laughed at this, and that's ultimately the thing. Is like I get originality, I get things, but I feel like that's where it is hard. Is sometimes you look at it and you're like, I can appreciate certain components of it, and if I was watching a theater piece where it was longer and there was more of a story and I don't know, I could maybe appreciate it more, but there is something where you're like, I do expect to laugh, and if that's not happening.
But people are laughing at all of these people. I've pretty early on realized I can't be like, that's not funny, because who am I to say? Because people are laughing at this stuff. People laugh at hacky stuff that I don't like. People laugh at like jokeless, formless things that I don't understand, and I'm like, well, I can't just be like, this is funny or not funny, because who am I? I have subjective taste in it.
Totally.
Like, it's the same thing being like, that song not catchy, even despite it's being a pop song that people like. I mean, like, look, to bring it back to musical theater, I saw Sweeney Todd on Broadway. No person is ever killed harder than Annalee Ashford at Sweeney Todd right now. Have you guys seen it?
I know it very well, but who does she play?
She plays Mrs. Lovett.
Okay,
she
sure.
crushes.
I buy it. Sure.
Bernie Mac in the clip that I described.
Yeah.
To this audience of people paying $1,000.
Like, I ain't scared of you motherfuckers.
And she's like she's doing the broadest fiscal
broad
comedy you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Now, I go like, I can't be like, this is sophisticated music. It's just because this audience, like,
Gianmarco, sorry.
I was in
the battery. I just want to make sure I don't want that thing to die.
Oh, this is unplugged. That's okay.
So people laugh at things.
Yeah, no, yes.
So I have to be judging more on than, which is hard. Which is, I think this is a I wouldn't say a gripe, like a thing that people find surprising about anyone who writes about comedy is that we have to judge more than what we laugh at. Because we have to assume that people are laughing at it to a degree.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we are just being like what we had a subjective, and that is, to my opinion, too biased as a thing to be judging things on, right? Because like, what are my tastes? I'm a 38-year-old guy with my certain background, right? Yeah. Like, I can't be like, well, these 10 people that make me laugh the most are the funniest comedians. It'd just be wrong, right?
Sure.
So we have to create new value systems, and in hope that my goal and the goal of the book, the goal of everything I do, is that people go to comedy shows and don't have any expectation for what the comedian can do. That's my number one goal, which then frees the comedian up to be any type of comedian. That can be literally just reading one-liners like they're doing Henny Youngman one-liners, or they can be Gerard Carmichael, and it's just sort of a vibe you're in for an hour.
Sure.
Right? I can name names, even though I love Gerard Carmichael, just because Gerard is, because he's so charismatic and because people let him just sit and do whatever he wants, he can essentially push the art forward.
Sure.
So then when it's as big as palette as possible, and then audience have no expectation what they're going in for, then they are as open as, and then the comedian can be open, and then everyone can create a more beautiful culture of being.
Sure, to a degree.
Yeah,
But this, and then we can. I do want to. We poor people who don't like. So, sometimes what I love with comedy, and the thing that I take pride in, like as a road comic, who I think like, and I think road comics often can feel like, God, doesn't anyone understand this? When my very conservative stepfather, I put on Anthony Jeselnik, and his jokes aren't they're edgy. They're edgy in a way that a conservative might come to gripes with.
Yes.
And to watch my stepfather go like is really special.
Yeah.
And I think what happens when it becomes too insular and people increasingly let go, people get too far of the point of like oh, well, just because it's not funny for me doesn't mean it's not funny. Then people get to a place where it's like, well, then are we allowed to, can you look at anything
it's hard.
and say anything? And I go like, then it becomes too far where suddenly I see things and I'm like, but this isn't funny. And you feel crazy.
Yeah.
You feel a degree of like, am I crazy? Am I crazy? I don't see this as funny. And people will go, I just remember there was one particular show that I won't say. And a friend of mine said, well, it's not funny, but it wasn't made for us. And I thought in a way that was so condescending. Sure. I understand like where it came from. And it was also, it was two white people talking about a non-white person performer. And there was a degree of like, it wasn't made for us. And I wanted to be like, I think that's condescending. I think, in fact, this thing is not of a high quality, and in fact, to pretend like this, it's not capable of that.
Yeah.
You're actually letting someone off the hook, and furthermore, you're allowing people to tune into the thing, and they go, "Oh, that's not funny." Oh, all these fucking liberal elite fucking motherfucker, and I'm like, there is quality out there, but once you let go of the word, you can't say nothing's not funny.
It becomes very hard. It is this feeling you have is a frustration that I believe, and as a frustration many artists of many art forms have to reckon with. And it's hard. Like chefs, right? It's like there was a French the value systems of French cooking were the dominant value systems for what good cooking was for a very long time. Then people push back upon those orthodoxies.
What were they? That they
certain sort of precision, like a fanciness, using like richness of sauces. Like it definitely was like heavied on higher fat, but less dynamic range of cooking because that is more cerebral or whatever, right? So then people started praising food of different ranges, right? It's like, oh, Thai food definitely has a wider dynamic range than French food. And then you go like, yeah, but it's less subtle. And you're just like, well, that's not the value system of that thing. And then their brain breaks, right? So then you have to create new ways of doing it, or you have to essentially just judge the art based on the value system that seemingly it has. And that is a difficult thing. And it is extremely abstract, which is why that's why critics do it and comedians don't do it, because we like that. We like being in an abstract place of how can we reckon with this thing when there is not an agreed upon idea of taste? Because when you do try to create an agreed upon idea of taste, it becomes so like that is like film has this problem where there's this canon of what good is that it's essentially like 99 movies directed by white guys. So that is like what good is. However, that it becomes so biased and so rigid that it then finds a way of being exclusive. It's hard. I think it's particularly hard now because of how people get comedy, which is through social media. So then they're only seeing comedy that appeals to specifically their taste. So then it's harder. And I do agree. And one of my goals going forward after I wrote this book was like, now I need to figure out, can we figure out a way to communicate what good is to people? I have an idea of a very, very ambitious project, which I can't talk about now because it's way too early. But part of the goal is to be like, can we agree that this is what good looks like? because that is not we were.
Have you emailed me about this yet?
No, it's not. It's a 2025 project, but it's going to be
Sure.
That's how long it's going to be, and I'll tell you what it is afterward. But the goal of it is in a time of the internet where people are truly, they're like, oh, my favorite comedian is this person. Do you know him? And the people are like, I have no idea what this is, and I have no context for them. And they're like, it just seems annoying. Like if you watch a comedian without any of the context of their act, you'd be like, they're not even doing comedy anymore. They're just like making funny faces. Like, but the audiences love those faces, right?
Sure.
And like, there's a terrible version of you who doesn't write the jokes, who just does the expressions, and there might be part of your audience.
Except for my first year in
who'll be
stand-up
like,
comedy.
that's my guy. And
Sure, and sometimes with some of these audiences, it's more about familiarity than great comedy. They just want to see their guy.
yeah, and to me, that's not a perversion of the art form, because to me, ultimately, the feeling of comedy is not so far removed from the feeling you get when you're with your friends. And you're not going to your friends because my friend specifically writes hard jokes. You're like, my friend's funny. But if you looked at the script that he said, it's not like good jokes. They're just sort of his vibe that he's...
Sure.
So I guess my question for you would be, I haven't seen your most recent stuff, but I have been up to date from...
It'll be on Netflix November 28th.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see it.
Just kidding.
But I want to see it. But it's like, is there a length of joke that you feel would be too long for you? Like, could you go up and be like, I'm going to do 50 minutes just on this one thing?
No, I mean, at least my dad's heart surgery, I'm still, the whole Hassan Minaj thing made me want to kind of add something to the end of it. But no, it's like a 6-7 minute story. But I have a lot of, I move through it through jokes. I think I like later in comedy, I fell in love with like the Jesselnicks of the world. And so as I was constructing that story, I said, can I make these greater points? But fucking every punchline, can it be a level that is really great and construct something bigger? Yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely I'm a joke emphasis person. Also, it's partly how I write. I write everything down. Because I think I was a playwriting, acting person first. So that informs how I ultimately came to write it. And I think as I have some other bits that, now that I'm doing longer time, it's different.
Do you ever feel scared, or when you're doing material, or do you feel like the jokes make you or prevent you from being as vulnerable?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But
because that will be the critique of it. And I'm just asking you because I didn't.
Sure, no. And I don't mind that critique, but I would say that's partially the reality of I'm like, well, let me get to a place where I trust. I'm also delivering for audiences that don't know me, and I'm there. I also think sometimes comedians lose sight of there's some degree of hey, these people. Yeah. You think about, wow, they hired a babysitter, and I'm going to come out there, and and so I have some stories that I talk through, of course, but then I work on those stories, and I try to have some hard fucking jokes in there to keep it going, but at the surface of a greater point. I don't think I'm just making jokes for the sake of jokes, which I do think some comedians do, and I do think it's exhausting. Well, let's
because I feel like this is what I would give to any joke-sorted people, which is at some point the audience you will want not the joke. There'll be a moment in that story, in any story, right, where they want to feel.
You will know who I am from my jokes.
Got it.
For sure.
Good.
I mean, do you think?
Yeah. It's hard to talk about everything without just naming exact things, and which we can't do, and we shouldn't do. So it's hard to.
I mean, I'm free to. So it's like I want to bring up.
It's hard to use examples of things without because you don't want to be.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I think I'm shifting more to a place where I'm like, all right, I have to. If I say something on this podcast, some people will hear. Yeah, and I got to deal with that. Because comedy, you just run into all of them. Yeah. I mean, I made a Hassan Minaj joke, and I just thought I'll run into him soon.
Yeah, he's around. Yeah, I mean, it's hard because that then I don't think it'll affect it because so many people are doing one-person shows now, and I think it's beyond him now. It expanded out of nowhere. No one was doing one-person shows 7 years ago, and I think
what's so frustrating for me is I remember I got a letter with anthrax in it, and I accidentally spilled it on my daughter, and I didn't talk about that because I thought, well, it happened to him too. Yeah. Turns out it didn't, and he got the glory for it. Yeah. Let's move on to our next segment.
This has gotta stop.
This has got to stop. We should power through these. I'll do a quick. This has got to
do a
stop.
quick one. I don't
and
actually have
Russell, you
one.
don't have to weigh in on this because I know these SNL cold opens. We got to reshift from post-Trump era.
Yeah.
I don't need it to cover everything that happened. There is nothing funny about the Speaker of the House thing. It is just a bunch of incompetent idiots just trying to get the thing they want in there.
Yeah.
It feels like a checklist. I think I could print out the top 100 things that trended on Twitter that week, and none of the jokes are. I just want you to take a swing. I just want you to take a swing on some weird sketch. The one sketch I always think of, and maybe you quote in your book, the Will Ferrell American flag on his.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just quoting your book at this point, but it was this is how you know I read it. It was post. What was
Oh,
it? That
yeah.
Post
It was the second
Post
episode
9/11.
back after 9/11.
Oh yeah.
Damn, that's
Yeah.
so old. But I remember watching it, and it's basically Will Smith is so patriotic.
Will Ferrell.
He's wearing Will Ferrell. Oh, Jesus, Will Smith.
Also in the book.
Will Ferrell is so patriotic. He's wearing an American flag thong, essentially, and that's the joke. And the funny thing is, this person in the office doing this thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, man,
And
that
just
is-
having a simple thing that doesn't involve 38 people, it feels like that.
Yes,
I
38.
don't know when that shift happened where we had to cover everything and have everyone. And
I think Trump did so many things. It felt like if you didn't address it, you were like literally not talking about the thing everyone wanted to hear. About.
This is my defense, and I defend SNL in this perspective in the book. And they've been doing it this. They're my least favorite part of the show. They always have been, because it always is kind of just like a thing that happened this week. Here's a reflection of it. I think of the cold opens as a loss leader. Like, essentially, like, we have to do that to prove the shows happened this week. It is so silly. It is. Because that is not a comedy decision.
It's going to hurt those rereruns. I'll tell you that. There is a degree of like these
but
reruns are going to feel.
Lauren cuts stuff out reruns if he feels like it doesn't age.
He's going to cut all the cold
but
opens.
I think
Right.
that
You ever
I
watch
feel like
their
the Will
old
Ferrell.
episodes? They
I
cut
feel like
a
the
lot
Will
of-
Ferrell one does that too.
But that
It's
wasn't
just
a cold open.
It's
That episode-
Oh, was not a cold
No,
open. Oh,
that
I thought
was
you were
not
saying
a cold open.
Oh.
Oh, I thought it was a cold open.
See.
Oh, that was it. In the cold open that week was like freaking Ashcroft doing some whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It was like Daryl Hammond doing some impression of someone, maybe George Bush.
See, I think it would be radical though to do something simpler like that.
Only time they do that, sometimes they'll do sports cold opens and they tend to be a bit better. But so often, I don't know when it started, but like for a really long time, they like to open with news to be like, this show's this week.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not unlike why a lot of late night shows start with a 10-minute monologue that's just
Yeah.
recapping the news. It is just to be like, this is today. Now today is over and we're being a show. It is so silly, but like, look, that's Lauren figured out a formula that some reason works.
Yeah.
And there are those people still who are like, something happens in the news and like, can't wait for SNL this week. I have
Yes.
never met
True.
that person in person, but I see them on Twitter.
True.
And I think their taste in comedy is weird, but
Yeah.
Sure.
that's that. So, but I get it. Why not make them better?
Oh, there's an SNL tweet that was up there. Do you have a This Has Got to Stop? We only have a little bit of time.
Yes,
so tell
I can
us.
do one. I can do a comedy one, but it might. Let me do a comedy one. And you can see
Okay.
if it's going to be too long. This has got to stop. If the audience isn't laughing at you, you don't tell them they're a bad audience.
I agree. 100% agree.
100%.
100%. Don't. Yeah. It's almost every show you go to, and you're like, stop. It can't be happening this often. It can't be that.
It doesn't help anything, and I know why you want to do it because it's your brain can't process that you're doing. It's just like, but it ruins the show kind of for every comedian afterwards.
Yes,
Now
yes.
they're in their head is like, we're an audience and we're doing a bad job.
Yes.
And it's like you did the wrong combo to unlock whatever.
I do think the only part of it that I'll defend is that, like, let's say you say something that's dark that the audience like really just goes like, I do think there's an allowance to address like, oh, a little too spicy.
but
Like
it gotta be
but it's got to be at least like we're still gonna have fun.
Yes.
As opposed,
Yeah,
but
instead
I think as a comedian, you do feel a need. You do have to acknowledge sometimes what
100%.
happened.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between like, oh, like some once in a while I'll be like, oh, so the audience brought some morality to the basement on McDougal Street on a Tuesday at a like. But
should
if
be
you
another
go,
joke,
like,
yeah.
You're bad, that's yes.
Yes, I remember. It's just like one of the last times I went to the Comedy Cellar. Someone made a joke about a cab driver smell bad, and the audience didn't laugh.
When did you? When were you at the Cellar?
Yeah.
And then the audience didn't laugh because it's like, like that.
Possible you just saw a bad show at the
Possible,
Cellar?
Wait, I feel like, truthfully, let me tell you, I feel like I saw the same comic at one of the recent shows when I went to see you before. I feel like it was the same joke. It's probably the same guy
I'm
that's
trying to
been
get
doing
him back to the Cellar.
It's probably the same guy that's been doing
I remember
it.
because after the show you said, "Oh my god, that one comedian with the smelly
Yeah, I
cab
love
driver
that.
bit."
Yeah.
And that comedian then attacked the audience for the rest of the set, and it's like you now.
First letter,
Of what?
the name.
No idea. No idea.
Okay, well,
No.
I'll say who it was afterwards. But
Okay.
and then it's like you both
Join the Patreon. We'll tell you the name.
ruined that 10 minutes of the audience's time. You also like completely lost your opportunity to like do a good set because you're now so
Yes. Sure.
And it's just like remove that idea unless you're going to make a bit out of it, which is
Yeah,
okay. And
of
I think
course.
because then you can do if you do a good job, you can then rearrange. It's like it's like you do a type of joke, it's too edgy for the audience. You're like that's where they are right now.
Yeah.
Then you can use it as sort of a trial balloon. That's good.
There was a comic from LOL that did like a Brooklyn show, got booked. Like it was like a comic working at LOL, booked him on a Brooklyn show. You never would have booked this comic on a show outside LOL. And they were bombing. And then they started to go into a bit where they did like an Arabic accent. And it was to watch it from afar
Oh my God.
was very funny to witness that their mind was like, I'll go this direction.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, the worst was I remember I think it was when Hannibal used to have his show, a very established good Comedy Cellar comedian didn't realize he was bombing because he was so on autopilot. And I'm like, that's the worst case scenario where it's just like he's doing it and because he always kills. He's like, and you're like, the audience is like, we don't even know what this stuff is, and that is the fear. It's when the comedian doesn't even know they're bombing is a very funny thing.
Let's just do it. Bless real quick. We have a pitch meeting with. Speaking of, our sketch team has a pitch meeting coming up. Is there a blessing? Is it something you're grateful for?
I like video podcasts. I think it's good. I think more people should do it. It's because who was doing it in the past made the world of video podcasts only a one. It was like the only video podcasts were for like the worst parts of like right-wing comedy fans.
Yeah.
So now that we have a more wide palette, I think it's good that now maybe like a 15-year-old boy can be like, oh, maybe like I don't have to hate everyone other than other 15-year-old boys.
I'm glad you like
Maybe it's
something
you.
that I'm creating.
Yeah. one.
This is coming. Oh, you have one?
Yeah.
Please.
Real quick. The quality of salad places has gone down. Sweet Green, Just Salad, all the ones that at one point were
The decline of Sweet Green has been tough.
and they've all gone down. But the woman today, I just had it. I popped into a Sweet Green or a Just Salad, and God, she did a really good job. I mean, it was like
Just Salad.
at a Just Salad.
At a Just Salad.
It was like everything was mixed well. She like really diced up the avocado, so it was sometimes you do it and they just throw that avocado in. So, anyways, that woman, it's been a long time. 25%.
Hey,
Because I was like,
good for you.
I mean, I could tell. You know, when you get it, she hit it, and you're like, that looks amazing, and it was. And I'm thankful for her.
All right, Just Salad. Sponsors, please. Mine, I had a great Shabbos meal with Tova's friend Michelle in Chicago. We're running late, and as I'm always reminded, Tova's like, we can't be late because we can't text them that we're late.
Yes.
And my bad, Tova. But Michelle, what an incredible meal. It was astounding. The leftovers were fantastic. This is coming out November 21st. What do you want to plug?
I have a book. It's called Comedy Book. It looks somewhat like this. I'll hold it to camera.
Yes.
It's about how comedy functions as an art form and functions as part of our society. I read about a lot of comedians with lots of different styles and different amounts of laughs per minute, and that's okay.
Russell, what do you want to plug?
Nothing, but follow me on Instagram at Russell J. Daniels, and you can see me at Gutenberg. Well, you can't see me, but I am in Gutenberg on Broadway, but I'm backstage.
He's in the back with the voodoo doll of Josh Gad. Guys, I'm at DC Comedy Loft November 24th and 25th. It's 4 shows. This is my homecoming weekend. Check it out. And then Uncle Vinny's Comedy Club, December 1st, December 2nd. Yes, that's the place Ariel Elias got the beer can thrown at her. Yes, I am returning to it because I am pathetic. Yeah, remember, guys, what does funny even mean? This is The Downside.
1, 2, 3. Downside. You're listening to The Downside
The Downside.
with Gianmarco Soresi.
Tell him, Russell.
Subscribe to The Downside right now.
Where?
Down here. Or here. We don't know, but just do it.
Or also, what else could they do?
They could follow the Patreon. They could subscribe to the Patreon.
No!
Sorry.
Patreon.com/downside.
Too much pressure.